Hi, Lisa. It's really lovely to see you this morning, and looking forward to having a conversation with you about the research that you conducted for us through Florence Nightingale Foundation. I wonder, Lisa, just to kick us off, if you can tell us a bit about yourself, your professional background, how you came to work at the Florence Nightingale Foundation.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Paula. First, let me just start by thanking you so much for having me on today. I absolutely loved doing this piece of work, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So, as you mentioned, my name is Lisa Plotkin, and I am the head of policy and influence at the Florence Nightingale Foundation. And for those of you listening who don't know us, we at Florence have been developing nurse and midwife leaders for 90 years now, and we do that mainly in three ways. So, firstly, we provide scholarships and leadership development programs for nurses and midwives at all stages of their career. Secondly, we provide a membership offer to organizations such as trusts or health boards, where when any organization joins, the entire nursing and midwifery workforce gets access to our benefits. And that includes things like events and online modules. And third, we have a policy and influencing function, which I lead, which essentially aims to take all of that intelligence from our kind of thousands of members and alumni and turn that into policy change. So I am not a nurse or midwife by background, although I work very closely with them. Um, what I am is a workforce policy researcher. So prior to working at Florence, I was at the British Heart Foundation as a health and care policy manager. And then before that, I was at various royal colleges doing workforce policy. And what attracted me the most about the opportunity to join Florence, which was about 18 months ago, was just I saw the incredible potential. They wanted to start policy and influencing arm, and I saw the incredible potential. I thought, oh my God, the organization has so many nurses and midwives who are so engaged, so active, so loyal, and want to give back. And I thought, that's what we need. You know, when I was at the British Heart Foundation, I really struggled to break into the cardiac nursing world and try. And I thought, those are the people who are going to tell us what is actually going on, and they just don't have a relationship with us. So why would they take the time out of their busy day necessarily to be feeding back on what we're doing? And at Florence, it was just the complete opposite, is that we had this huge rich community of expertise who were just waiting for us to tap into it to try to make real change happen. And this piece of work is really a perfect example of that in action.
Thanks, Lisa. It's really interesting what you're saying there, and kind of what strikes me is the importance of relationships, and having all of those enthusiastic individuals around to really make things happen. And I suppose at the NMC, we've had a really strong and long relationship with Florence Nightingale Foundation, and have worked on lots of projects together, haven't we? And I suppose it's worth highlighting that relationship and the importance of that
Mm.
relationship as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we really brought to this partnership was, and we'll get into that later when we talk about how we did the research, but you were able to contact all of these registrants. You're able to do that, and then we were able to be cherry pick the ones that we were like, oh, we need this exact expertise, so we could go in there with the real sort of depth of the relationship, whereas the NMC has that breadth of being able to
Mm.
contact so many people and make sure that what we're doing is representative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It worked really well, as we're going to find out.
Yeah.
So I wonder, Lisa, if you can just give us an outline of the original ask from the NMC and the aims of the research.
Yeah, so as some of your listeners will probably know, the NMC is at a real critical turning point with advanced practice. So across the UK, nurses and midwives are increasingly taking on these complex expert roles in advanced practice, and they're making crucial clinical decisions and managing complex care. But the interesting thing is that this development has happened really organically without any central oversight. And this is not unique to the UK. This has happened globally. Um, and currently, there's no single standard for what makes an advanced practitioner. And each UK nation has its own framework. And while there are a lot of similarities, there are also differences and different organizations. So, for instance, universities have different entry requirements for their advanced practice programs. And we've ended up, I think this research found more than 20 different job titles in use just in the UK to indicate an advanced nurse or midwife practitioner, but that's really on the conservative end. I think there are lots more than 20. And this variation, whilst definitely brings a lot of positives in terms of innovation and allowing people to do new and innovative things, it also has brought some real challenges, both for the practitioners themselves, but also for employers trying to understand what skills and competencies they can expect from the workforce. So that's really the background as to why the NMC launched their larger advanced practice review, which I think you committed to in your 2020 strategy. So this has been sort of signaled for a long time that, this is coming, which I think just shows the NMC's really deliberative, consultative approach to this. It's being done really carefully, and it is looking at how to bring some consistency to these roles, not really just for the sake of regulation, but also to ensure that the workforce is properly prepared and supported. And so, with this review underway, the NMC recognized something really important, and that was that we can't make these changes without understanding how they're going to impact our international nurses and midwives. And this isn't a small consideration. Our internationally educated colleagues make up a significant and growing part of the register. I think it's around 23% of our register now, bringing valuable skills and experience from healthcare systems around the world. And that's really where this research comes in. So, we at Florence were asked to really dig deep into this issue. So, we were asked to look at what advanced qualifications and experiences our international nurses and midwives are bringing with them when they arrive in the UK. How well are those skills and that expertise recognized once they're in the service? And are they actually able to use that expertise? We were also asked to look at how we can support our international colleagues to become advanced practitioners, regardless of whether or not they had those skills before. Just as a kind of normal registrant, how can we support them to become advanced practitioners? And then we also looked at how internationally educated colleagues have navigated the career pathway to become advanced practitioners. And this, as we found, is a completely novel evidence base. It doesn't exist anywhere else. Nobody has looked at these questions before. So it was just really, really exciting to feel like we were bringing something really novel and fresh to the research.
Yeah, and I think that's a really helpful kind of outline, and the reason we're doing the advanced practice review at the NMC. But you're absolutely right. A significant proportion of our register are internationally educated nurses and midwives, and that is growing. And it's really important that anything that we do for the future, that we understand those impacts on those individuals, and you know recognize some of the barriers that they might face and what we need to do in that space to support them. So yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Lisa. So I wonder, how did the research fit in with the wider Florence Nightingale Foundation goals, and how did you decide that the research was aligned with the organization?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I really felt like this research project was designed for us. I really felt like we were uniquely positioned to conduct this research, and that's largely due to our established track record in supporting this part of the workforce. So, we have built significant expertise and trust with our IENMs, primarily through our IENM online leadership development program, which has supported thousands of international nurses and midwives, and especially the ones who are kind of newly arrived here. So it's a leadership program tailored to also support those critical transition years as well. So if there are any internationally educated nurses and midwives who are listening, we have that kind of available on a rolling basis. So, and usually they are funded. So, please do have a look at that on our website. And that gave us, when we were developing that program, we started lots of different subject expert groups, and we did lots of research into looking at the transition experience of IENMs. We also facilitate, and I am the secretariat of the International Nursing and Midwifery Association network. And this is a network which connects, it's about 34 different INMAs, we call them. And they are the associations that NHS England originally established to give that pastoral support to nurses and midwives once they arrive here. And that gave us direct access to authentic voices and experiences. So, on a quarterly basis, I'll be meeting with these network representatives, talking about the challenges that these professionals face. So, a lot of the issues that came to the surface in this research had already been brought to, our attention in another context. So, issues with funding, issues with apprenticeships, issues with cultural experiences. We had already had a group of people who'd been hearing about these things for a long time. So our deep understanding of the challenges that they were facing, and combined with our trusted position, meant that we could gather those rich and honest insights when it came specifically about advanced practice. And just on a practical note, those relationships meant that we could quickly mobilize those focus groups across all 4 nations and secure the high response rates to our survey. So, for instance, if you need to find an advanced nurse practitioner in midwifery who's now, who qualified in India or qualified in Canada, who's now working in Wales, we were able to say to the community, these are actually the people that we really need to make sure we're hearing from. So who do you know? Who do you know? And sure enough, everybody knows everybody. They were able to put us in touch with those people. And so that was just invaluable, because it would not have happened without those informal networks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The fact that you had those networks and that reach meant that we got answers to the questions that we were looking for, which has been invaluable. So I think you're right. You were the organization who could undertake this research and bring it to life for us. Um, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit, Lisa, about the approach that you used for the research.
Yeah, absolutely. So we designed a pretty robust mixed methods approach for this research, and I can just break down each component. So we started with some foundational work. So before even thinking about doing surveys or focus groups, we thought, jointly with the NMC, what do we already know? What is already out there? So we did a rapid evidence scan first to understand what was already known about advanced practice globally. So, particularly in countries where the UK now primarily recruits from. So, that would be India, the Philippines, and Nigeria. So, this was really about trying to, from my perspective, this was really about trying to understand, if somebody arrives here and they say, I was an advanced nurse practitioner in critical care, and I qualified, or I had that role in, let's say, Nigeria or Ghana, I wanted to have an understanding of what that actually meant. So we looked at things like, what were the scope of practice characteristics. We looked at whether they had the 4 pillars that we have here, in their home country. We looked at the educational requirements. So did they need a master's degree? Did they need a certain number of hours of experience? So that really gave us kind of crucial insights into the advanced practice skills and experience that people were bringing into this country, which we didn't really know before. Um, We then, attached to that, did a rapid scoping review looking at what the published evidence was telling us about the experience of advanced practitioners once they come to the UK. And this work told us two things. Firstly, it told us that advanced practice is spreading globally. So it is likely there are registrants here in the UK who were advanced practitioners overseas. But secondly, it also told us that we didn't know anything about these people and we didn't know anything about their experience. So we knew from that that we had to do some primary research of our own. So we decided to do a survey. And so for participant selection, we identified three distinct groups of internationally educated nurses and midwives. So the first group were those who were those advanced practitioners overseas, or they were in the role overseas. The second group were those who were now here and they were interested in pursuing advanced practice in the UK. And the third group were those who had already achieved advanced practice qualification or role here in the UK. And those groups were not mutually exclusive. So you could be in groups 1 and 3 or in groups I think it's 1 and 3, and maybe groups 1 and 2. Yeah, and then after after that, we decided to do a series of focus groups. So the survey reached 1,600 participants, which was fantastic. But then we wanted to deepen our understanding, so we had 3 focus groups with each of the 3 groups, and then we had an additional series of one-to-one interviews with midwives to try to just understand a little bit more about the nuanced difference between advanced practice in nursing and advanced practice in midwifery.
Thanks, Lisa. That's really helpful. And yeah, the kind of the differences across the UK between advanced practice in nursing and in midwifery are at different stages, aren't they? So we know that advanced practice in nursing has been around a lot longer, and advanced practice in midwifery is a much more recent evolution, if you like. So it'd be interesting to hear about some of those findings with the midwives that you spoke to, and kind of their experience in their own countries where it might have been different.
Yeah, and I think that was actually one of the more surprising things about the research was that abroad, for instance, you're much more likely to be a nurse midwife than to be dual qualified. And that to a certain extent does extend into when you become an advanced practitioner abroad. So it definitely feels like the internationally educated community are more comfortable and more open to becoming advanced practitioners in midwifery than I think I thought I would find, because there was lots of discussions around how midwives are autonomous practitioners at the point of registration already. So why do we necessarily need this role? And we have the consultant midwife role, and there was a bit of confusion. But I didn't really find that with the midwives that we spoke to. They very much saw that there was a role for an advanced practitioner in midwifery. They saw the difference and they were interested in pursuing it here. The big change, or one of the big differences we found, was that they were just more confused as to how to do that than the nurses were. So even though there was high confusion across the board, it was the midwives who were even kind of more in the dark about the pathways to access that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, Lisa. So it'd be really good to hear about the findings from the research.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many fascinating findings. So I could really be here all day. So I do encourage people to read the full report or read the executive summary to really be able to understand the kind of full richness of it. But I'll just share a few of the striking insights that I think really highlight the complexity of the AP landscape for our international colleagues. So first, we found this huge disconnect around skills recognition. And so this wasn't necessarily surprising. I think this is probably the case regardless of whether it's AP skills or just any skills. I imagine, when people come here, they have to sort of start from scratch in many ways. And so 2/3 of the IENMs who came here with advanced practice experience. And remember, we looked at their experience and it aligns not entirely, but in many ways considerably with, UK AP standards. So these people are highly skilled, qualified professionals, but 2/3 of them said that their UK employer barely acknowledges these skills. So, I mean, just imagine being an experienced practitioner, perhaps running complex clinics in your home country, or being a professor of midwifery, as one of the
Mm.
focus group participants were, and then coming here and just not having that be acknowledged in any way. I think one of the nurses told us, she said, it's like all of the skills I had were just stripped away from me. And that's not just frustrating on an individual level, that's just a huge missed opportunity for our healthcare system.
Mm.
And second, this was about the large knowledge gap that I just talked about. So I thought there would be a gap, but I didn't think it would be this wide. So we surveyed, over 1,000 internationally educated staff who came into that group 2 category, and these were the people who were interested in pursuing AP. And nearly 3/4 of them, so 73% of them, said that they had little to no understanding about how to do this. And I think if we asked our registrants overall, you might find a high number, but I don't know if it would be as high as 73%. So I'd be interested if anybody knows that, if anybody knows that. So this is definitely, this lack of knowledge is definitely a barrier for them. And as I mentioned, it's particularly acute for midwives. So 84% of them said that they don't understand how to access this career pathway. So that's really nearly all of them. Um, and third, we heard a lot about finances as a barrier. So while 70% of those interested in AP, they cited financial constraints as a main barrier to pursuing advanced practice. But I think this is really tied up with that lack of knowledge, because many would be eligible for employer funding in most cases, but they don't know that. They don't understand how the funding works. And there is this perception, especially amongst people with visas, that they will have to pay international student fees if they're self funding, which they won't necessarily have to do, even if they're self funded, but they meet the residency requirements. So there's just a lot of confusion that gets tangled up with their immigration status that are acting as barriers to these people pursuing AP. Um, but one of the kind of more positive findings was just the impacts of practical support to navigate those barriers, because they are definitely not insurmountable. So amongst those who successfully became advanced practitioners in the UK, 82% of them said that their manager was a key enabling factor. And when you dig into their stories, you find it's really simple things, like managers who understand visa requirements, managers who can give clear information about the pathway, about different funding opportunities. Mentorship, I mean, having a mentor, having somebody that you can just ask these questions to, it really was as simple as that for many of these people. And it just shows how solvable many of these barriers are. And these aren't really, this doesn't really mean that the NMC has a role here in this, because these are not, this is not a regulatory change to opening up advanced practice. These are just simple things. um, and the last finding I'll share is just the strong support for regulation. So 69% of our survey respondents across the board said that they wanted the NMC to take a greater role in overseeing AP. There are important differences, though, that I think we do need to understand. So this support is strongest amongst those who qualified overseas. So 82% of them, which I think you can understand why they're saying I've already got these qualifications, so maybe the NMC can bring in some kind of way for my skills to be recognized. But then support is weakest amongst those who qualified here, perhaps reflecting their anxieties or concerns about what they might have to do, again, in order to have their qualifications recognized.
Yeah, some really interesting findings there, Lisa. And I think you're right. from our own engagement and conversations that we've been having with professionals, um, there is often limited understanding around how to access the roles. But I think you're right; it's probably not quite as high as the internationally educated nurses and midwives. And you're right; this perhaps isn't within the kind of regulatory sphere of what we do at the NMC, but we have responsibility and role in supporting and influencing, and that's where some of what you're talking about we can get involved in having those conversations and making sure that we're talking about it, particularly around, you mentioned the missed opportunities of these really, really experienced people working within the healthcare system, and I think there is a role for us to be having those conversations with senior leaders across the healthcare system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I know that you mentioned briefly that you were surprised from some of the findings of the discussions with midwives, but was there anything else within the research that you weren't expecting to hear or that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot, but one of the most unexpected discoveries for me was just this sheer complexity around qualification, recognition, and the variability. So, we found nurses and midwives with master's degrees from their home countries being told that their qualifications were equivalent to A levels here in the UK. But once again, it was really the variability because, one focus group participant said that her degree wasn't deemed sufficient because it wasn't from a quote recognized university, while another one with similar qualifications but from a different university was accepted straight onto an AP program. So the inconsistency,
Mm.
it was just far more arbitrary than even I had anticipated. So I thought, oh, there's going to be a lot of variability, but I was just surprised at the amount of sort of things that were almost, people had to overcome. Including around the basic entry requirements. So this is around kind of having to take GCSE level maths and English tests, to access the apprenticeship route, but also to like top up their own qualifications that were not deemed high enough. So that was another thing that I just wasn't necessarily expecting to hear. Um, and I think also, perhaps not surprising, but just something that I think we need to understand a little bit more was just the stark differences in experiences between professionals from different countries. So, for instance, 84% of nurses and midwives from India strongly support increased regulation of AP, and only 53% from the Philippines feel the same way. And I think there is something going on there about when you look at the three countries the UK primarily recruits from. I think we found that registrants from the Philippines are more likely to become advanced practitioners than registrants from India and Nigeria, and then therefore they're more likely to want to maintain the status quo. And why, why is that happening? So these kinds of variations suggest that there are deeper cultural and systemic factors at play that I hadn't fully appreciated.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think that the kind of challenges with accessing programs, we're hearing from again professionals across the UK who are trained here, and also to some extent the transportability or the mobility of the workforce once they get
Mm,
those qualifications across the UK. It's not as stark, obviously, as internationally educated, but there are also those challenges within the UK, and certainly this work hopes to address that variability, that inconsistency, through bringing in those education standards, those standards of proficiency. But yeah, really interesting what you're saying about the variation between individuals from different countries and why that might be. I mean, certainly talking to you as we, we met regularly to discuss the progress of the research. You could kind of, we were having those exciting conversations, weren't we, where we could see the next bit of research that was coming and that we needed
Yes.
to perhaps do. So yeah, it's been a really interesting piece of work.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd be interested in exploring is, is this the case for any post-registration qualification? So if you were
Yeah.
to, and any sort of skills recognition, or, would you find the same patterns amongst registrants? So it's not
Mm.
just about AP, or actually, is it that AP is so complicated and is such a departure, from everyday practice, that you have these additional barriers? And that's what I would like to know. So is this for the AP review to just be thinking about, or is this something that we need to be just thinking more holistically about?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and there are other things that have come up, through conversations and through the review about, different areas of practice and kind of, you know, the different fields and working in different specialities and things. So it kind of, as you were saying that, got me thinking about that. So perhaps there's another conversation to have, I think,
Yeah.
um, around that, because I think you're right.
Hmm.
Um, so we've probably spoken a little bit about this, but just wondered, perhaps if there's anything to expand on in terms of the complexities with nurses and midwives who gain their additional advanced practice qualifications overseas, and what considerations we should give to these individuals to ensure that they can utilize these skills once they come to the UK. And I suppose, we talked about our support and influence role, but given some of the processes and things that we have in place, is there more work for us to do at the NMC to support these individuals, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I completely do, and there are a lot of players in this space, so it's definitely not something just for the NMC. I mean, I think there's really something for the ICN, for the international community to be doing in terms of the standardization of AP, and helping organizations like the NMC with how to map competencies from one country onto another. So I think there is a big role for others to be playing. But I think it's as you were mentioning, there is just something about transitional support, and I know that the NMC already provides the kind of fantastic Welcome to the UK program, and I know you're doing a lot in this space already. But so I would just say keep doing that, because
Mm.
a lot of what we heard was around the backdrop of this. A lot of people, when we were talking to them, were saying, I'm coming here against, I'm not just dealing with different clinical practice, I'm dealing with an entirely different healthcare system and
Mm.
professional culture. So not only do I not know how to say, how can my advanced skills be recognized, I don't even know who to say that to. I don't even, all of these things. So I think we know from the literature review, one of the things we did find was that when people are given that transition support and that pastoral support, they are less likely to leave. They
Mm.
are more likely to say that they had a positive transition experience. And we also know that, through talking to them in the focus groups, that they're more likely to feel valued. So that doesn't necessarily mean that their AP skills were kind of formally recognized, but it means that they feel that they're seen and they're recognized because they're connected with people who either are from their community, or people who are showing that culturally competent sort of management and leadership that we would hope that all of our registrants receive. And
Mm.
there also is another point around the cultural aspects of integration. So our research showed that even when their qualifications were technically recognized, they often faced subtle barriers to utilizing their skills fully. So one of the focus group participants, or maybe it was a survey respondent, said to us, I'm quoting here now, the people I am working with didn't believe in my judgment because I was trained outside of the UK. Um, so I think this suggests that we need to work on kind of support mechanisms and just general cultural issues across the entire workforce. And I don't think that would be a surprise to anyone. I think we know that there are long-standing systemic biases
Mm.
displayed across the health system.
Yeah, I think that they're really interesting, really interesting findings, Lisa. And I think you're right. Some of them are not surprising, but really powerful when individuals kind of share their own experience. And you mentioned the Welcome to the UK program that the NMC is doing at the moment, and I think they've equally been surprised by some of the things that they've heard when they're out and having those conversations. Um, but but it is having those conversations, and it's having those conversations not only with the internationally educated professionals, but also with the managers and the people working within the system. Because I don't think, and this is not a surprise either, is that people are not often as aware as we might expect them to be of their own kind of biases and things like that. So
Hmm.
so I think that that work that we're doing in that space, and of course the work that you continue to do as well, is really important in ensuring that those conversations continue to happen in a constructive and supportive way.
Yeah, and I think that, there is just something about managers also understanding what, nursing and midwifery pre and post registration education looks like in
Yeah,
some of these countries. It doesn't have to be every single one of them, but the main ones where you're having,
yeah,
the bulk of the workforce come through. Because if somebody says, I was an advanced practitioner in critical care in this Indian state, I now know what that means. I know
mm,
the robustness of the program and how it was developed and how it was evaluated over decades, and I know the things that they're doing. But other people won't know that, and they'll just think, oh well, maybe that was not as robust as our standards are here. When we have found that there is significant alignment, but there are some areas where there isn't alignment, and so that would just help people be able to explain why perhaps you do need to go on this course, or you do need to do something like that. It would just help them feel that they were understood, rather than
mm,
this kind of huge chasm, I feel like, in experience that people were telling us about.
yeah, yeah. I think it's really important. Thanks, Lisa. We've probably started to touch on some of this through our conversation as well, but are there particular key recommendations for the NMC and the continued work that we're doing with the review?
Yeah, I, I think first, and I don't envy the NMC this task, because this is really complicated and tricky. So I have a lot of confidence in the staged approach that the review is taking, because I think that's exactly right, because there are so many considerations. I think this is a broad this this piece of work touches on more than just the AP review, because I think we need to fundamentally rethink how we assess and recognize international AP experience. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the NMC doesn't recognize any post registration qualifications. So this is,
Yeah.
if you're a prescriber, anything, they don't recognize it. So I think that that's probably the first thing that might need a look at. And rather than the current patchwork approach, I know, the NMC, we're recommending, should consider developing a standardized framework for evaluating international qualifications and experience. So This could include options like a competency-based assessment or a structured bridging program. We don't know exactly what it could, needs to look like, but something that acknowledges existing expertise while also ensuring alignment with UK standards. And I think that is really, really difficult. So I think that's going to take some time to think through. And it's difficult because of the incredible variation in global advanced practice standards. And there are clearly other countries where you could say, okay, they have formal regulation, the Singapores of the world, Australia, where those could be the first people you try it out with, but that just risks further embedding inequalities in terms of access. So I think it's a really tricky one to get right. Secondly, the entry requirements for the AP programs need careful review, which I know is on the NMC's radar. There's lots of challenging situations and barriers like the GCSE requirement for apprenticeships, or the master's degrees not being classified as A levels. So the NMC should consider working with the educational providers to develop more flexible, competency-focused entry criteria that can recognize that diverse educational background. Another thing that I didn't get to talk about was the need for streamlining language proficiency requirements as part of that. So one of the things we found, I guess this was surprising, that one of the things we found was just how surprising was how many people talked about the English language requirements at level 7 being a barrier to them. So our research showed that some people were being asked to retake language tests despite already practicing successfully in complex clinical environments, so that academic writing requirements in English were what was the barrier that kept coming up. And I've already mentioned this one, but any new regulatory framework, we think needs to explicitly address that cultural competence issue. We know AP isn't just about clinical skills. It's about leadership, it's about education, it's about research. And these aspects can look quite different across global healthcare systems. So we need a framework that recognizes and values this diversity of experience. At Florence, we are a leadership, we primarily, do leadership development, and we know that globally the conception of leadership is different. And even just saying leadership can be off-putting to some people who don't feel comfortable taking up that space. So I think we just need to acknowledge that as well. And finally, there is a strong case for the NMC to consider the grandparenting clause in any of the new regulations. So about recognizing that existing expertise. And this will be really complex as well, because this is also about people who have credentialed, and this is about people beyond the IENM workforce. So that will be really challenging to get right as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Some really key things there for us, and I know that we're already starting to have those conversations and think about some of the recommendations that you've made and the implication as we progress through phase 2 and a number of those work streams. And you mentioned that transition process, or that grandparenting process, and I think for us that's one of the most complex, if not the most complex, work stream for us to be able to get right. Because you're right, within the UK there are a number of kind of credentialing models. There are a number of people who haven't kind of been through traditional programs of study, MSCs in advanced practice. So not dissimilar to the internationally educated nursing and midwifery workforce. But really highlighting to us that, as you say, the differences internationally and how we incorporate that into our thinking around those processes and those approaches when we do bring them into our kind of into regulation. So I think they're really, really important. And similarly, the entry requirements for university, that will be a key part of kind of our education standards. But these things are really, really important. And as you say, and as we've spoken about, this internationally educated workforce, we is growing. We need them to help us,
Mhm.
to help support our workforce. So we need to be thinking about these things going forward, and kind of what it means for, as you say, not only advanced practice but more widely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've probably touched on, just as I said there, that the implications and the recommendations for your research, and some of what you're saying is not just relevant to the advanced practice space, if you like, but has broader implications
Mhm.
for professionals, nurses and midwives. I know we focused on, but probably to other healthcare professionals as well. And I just wondered if there was anything you wanted to expand on in relation to that.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate that, I think what a lot of people were writing about or telling us about, either in the surveys or in the focus groups, was really not specific to AP at all. It really is about the broader narrative about how we integrate international healthcare professionals into our system. So the issues that we were hearing, the lack of recognition of prior experience, the complex web of requirements, the uncertainty and confusion, the feeling of having to start from scratch, that absolutely I know will not be unique to AP. It is just symptomatic of a wider challenge in how we
Mm.
value and integrate our international talent, or anybody who has come onto the register in a different way, really, than the sort of standard way that it was first envisioned. It could be with older people joining the register with different skills and experiences, and how we recognize that prior learning. And I know there are mechanisms in place to do that, but I think what we've heard loud and and clear is that if people don't understand them, they might as well not be there. If they're that difficult to access, it's kind of on paper, it's not really happening in reality. So I think these findings have really wide implications. And as you said, our international workforce is only going to keep growing, but we know from recent NMC spotlight reports that they're leaving as well. These are
Mm.
highly skilled, sought after, people who are not afraid to move, and will, they have that, energy and that sort of drive to achieve and to progress. And if we're not enabling them to progress and work at the full height of their capability, somebody else will be. So that's my fear, is that we're at risk of losing these people if we don't address some of these issues.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's a huge thing, isn't it, to move from one country to another, and all that entails, and we both have experience of that. But you're absolutely right. They will move to where they feel valued, where they feel supported, where they feel
Mm-hmm.
able to pursue their career in the way that they want to. Um, Lisa, it's been a fascinating, I think it's been about 45 minutes we've had the conversation, but it's been really great to hear you bring the research to life. It's a hugely important piece of research for us as part of the review, but as an organization, I think, for all the reasons that we've been discussing. And I know that you're going to be discussing the findings and the research a little bit more with colleagues across the NMC in the coming months as well. Is there anything kind of before we finish that you wanted to share that I haven't asked, that you think we haven't touched on?
Just to end on a more positive note, again, just to reiterate that a lot of these challenges are not insurmountable. So if there is anybody who listening who is interested, whether you're internationally qualified or not, who wants to pursue advanced practice, you should be able to do it with the right support, and that support is out there. So I would just encourage anybody to, you can definitely reach out to us at Florence if you're internationally educated, and we can put you in touch with your association chairs, and they can help you with navigating career pathways, or even just settling in. And I'm sure you can reach out to the NMC as well if you do have any questions about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, Lisa. There were within the research, there's some really positive experiences of from individuals who have, who are in successful advanced practice roles and doing what they love. So
Mm.
I think it's important to end with that. So it's been great speaking with you, Lisa. I really thank you for your time and for the research, doing the research for us. It's been fantastic working with you, and I hope we continue to do more research together. Um, if the research report itself will be published in the coming months, so do keep a lookout on Florence Nightingale Foundation's website and also our own website. But thanks again, Lisa. I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks so much, Paula. All right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.